Now I think that is one of the most jazz sounding chords, if there is such a thing. Just sounds jazz to me. So this is a dominant 7 sharp 11 chord, or more specifically the way that I'm playing it is as a 13 sharp 11. So I've got a 13 chord, which is a dominant chord for the 9th and the 13th, and then a sharp 11. So I've got natural 9, natural 13, sharp 11. And there's a really simple way of voicing this on the piano, because effectively all we've got is the shell of our chord in our left hand root, 3rd and 7th, and then I'm playing an upper structure of a major triad, a whole tone up from the root note. So I'm playing a D major triad over the shell of a C7 chord. Okay, let's unpack my take on this chord and how and where we can use it. We hear this chord appearing all over the place in jazz, and it has this special quality. And, importantly, it doesn't quite function like a normal dominant chord. A standard dominant chord functions to create tension and pushes us to a resolution of 5th down. 9 times out of 10, a G7 resolves to a C major 7, a B flat 7 resolves to an E flat major 7, an A7 resolves to a D major 7, etc., etc. You've played this 1,000 times before. A dominant chord moves to a resolution of 5th down. Now typically in a jazz context, a dominant 7 with a sharp 11 doesn't function like a typical 5-to-1. You are much more likely to see a 7 sharp 11 used when the chord in question is either a tritone substitution or a backdoor dominant. You can recognise a tritone substitution as a dominant chord that resolves a semitone down or a half step down. You can recognise a backdoor dominant as a dominant chord that resolves a whole step or a whole tone up. Example in My Romance. There's the sharp 11. Or in Just Friends. Now, before I get any comments, yes, you can use this on a standard 5-to-1 dominant movement. It does get used, you might hear it from time to time, but my point is, I think more commonly, it gets used in other ways. Now, just a few words about dominant chords in general and chord symbols. Hold tight. Dominant chords generally serve the purpose of taking us somewhere. And they do that by creating this dissonance and tension that feels like it needs to resolve. There's chord tones within the chord that will fall or raise a semitone to a resolution on another chord. And because it's fundamentally built on this idea of dissonance and tension and instability, it means that we can really increase that tension or decrease it, and it's still going to function in the same way and sound great. So we could just have our very plain G7 that wants to move down to our C. But within a jazz context, that's pretty boring. Now within jazz, we've got various levels of tension that we could choose to add on top of that. So we could just have maybe the 9th and the 13th that's still very diatonic. Or we could add flat 9. Or what about something a bit more crunchy? Now with this freedom does come great responsibility. Not really, but it does lead me on to a quick word about chord symbols. Now chord symbols give us information, not instructions. I stole that from Jeremy Siskind, but it's true and very important. Most jazz lead sheets will just have simple chord symbols on them. Just a simple minor 7 or 7, major 7. But any decent jazz musician is looking at those simple chord symbols and choosing to add in extra colour themselves. They're adding in the 9ths, the 11ths, the 13ths. And as we just heard, in the case of dominant chords, we have so many more options, diatonic and chromatic, to make those dominant chords sound more interesting. So most of the time, the individual player gets to decide the amount of colour, the level of tension that gets applied to these chords. And I think that the interpretation of these simple chord symbols generally comes down to a combination maybe of these three things: the skill level and understanding of the player, the stylistic context of the music they're playing, and the personal taste of the player. Now, sometimes you will see chord symbols with extra information, and the times that you see a dominant 7 with a sharp 11, the chances are that chord will be either a tritone substitution or backdoor dominant. Or sometimes it's because the sharp 11 is in the melody, so they've also written it in the chord symbols. But next time you're learning a new tune or looking through a lead sheet and you see a chord symbol with a dominant chord with a sharp 11, see how often they are tritone substitutions or backdoor dominants. Sometimes on the lead sheet you're going to have a dominant chord that is a tritone substitution or a backdoor dominant, but it doesn't have that extra information. And you should be, if you could recognize that, then you can play that 13 sharp 11 voicing, or you can add that sharp 11 in there and it's going to sound so nice. Now, I guess the big question is, why are these most commonly used with tritone substitutions and backdoor dominants? I'm not sure I've got a great answer for you, but I'll share my thinking nonetheless. I'm sure that if there is a better explanation, someone will let us know in the comments. So I'm not going to go into detail about what a tritone substitution is or a backdoor dominant is. I've made separate videos that delve into that more deeply, so you can watch those if you so wish. But quickly, a tritone substitution is where we swap out a dominant chord for another dominant chord that's a tritone away. A tritone is the interval of 3 whole tones. So if we had a simple 2, 5, 1 in C, and then we're going to swap out our G7 for a dominant chord, a tritone away. So it's 1, 2, 3 whole tones, D flat 7. So instead of playing G7, we're going to play D flat 7. 2, 5, tritone, 1. And obviously what we've been talking about is that tritone we can make into a 7 sharp 11 to make it more interesting. So we could have D minor 7, D flat 7 sharp 11, C major 7. Sounds great, right? Now, why should that sharp 11, the G in our D flat chord, why should this be favourable for tritone substitutions? Well, there's 2 obvious reasons that come to my mind. Firstly, that G is the root note of the chord that we've substituted. Our G7 to a C. We've substituted that G7 for the D flat 7, but we've kept that G with... That G has a natural pull down to the root anyway. So that G is going to help us move to the C, but also voice leading. Having that G in our D flat chord and also present in our resolution makes for a more pleasing movement. It's voice leading. And what about a backdoor dominant? Why is a 7 sharp 11 a choice for backdoor dominants? So as I said before, backdoor dominant is where we have a dominant chord that resolves up a whole step or a whole tone to a resolution. So in the key of C, our backdoor dominant would be a B flat 7. And if we turn that into a 7 sharp 11, or the way that I've voiced it, so the sharp 11 here in our B flat is the E natural. So that's our sharp 11 here. So for me, the obvious reason here, again, is voice leading. We've got this really strong chord tone of our target chord, the chord that we're heading to. So to have this connecting the 2 chords just makes for a more pleasing movement. And if we're voicing the chord in the way that I've been voicing it as a 13 sharp 11, then those extra chord tones that we've been adding, so the 9th, the sharp 11 and the 13th of our B flat, it spells out the root 3rd and 5th of our target chord. So again, that voice leading, having that present makes for a smoother movement because we've got these chord tones that are pulling us already to that resolution. So in both of those examples, the presence of the sharp 11 actually helps the movement of our non-conventional resolutions to a semitone down or a whole tone up, rather than stronger typical resolution of a dominant chord of fifth down. If you've got any other reasons as to why these chords are so commonly linked to these types of harmonic movements, then please let me know. Now you might hear this chord called a Lydian Dominant chord, and that's because it's linked to the Lydian Dominant scale. Lydian Dominant scale, what's that? Hold on a minute, I'll let you know. Jazz musicians like to connect chord types to scales and modes, so that when they're on certain chord types, they know what scale options they have to play with. Now, certain chords, like a minor 7 chord or a major 7 chord, there's a number of different scales that you could use over that one chord type. Whereas a 13 sharp 11, so a 7 chord with a natural 9, sharp 11, 13, not so many options. Now, there's only one scale that includes all of those chord tones. Now, if we look at the chord tones that we have within our voicing, we have the root, we have a major 2nd or 9th, we have the major 3rd, we have a sharp 11 or sharp 4. We don't have a 5th, but we would add the natural 5 or perfect 5th here, natural 6 or 13, and a flat 7. So root 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, flat 7. There's only one scale that includes those intervals, and it's the Lydian Dominant scale. Now, the Lydian Dominant scale is a mode of the melodic minor scale. If we were to take, it's the 4th mode of the melodic minor scale. If we were to play G melodic minor, which is just a major scale with a flat 3, so it's a major scale with a flat 3. If we were to play those notes, but we start on the 4th degree, on the C, then we have all the scale tones from our 13 sharp 11 chord. So when we're playing a 13 sharp 11 chord or a 7 sharp 11 chord, as an option for our scale is Lydian Dominant. The Lydian Dominant is a popular scale choice for jazz musicians, which is why when I'm voicing the chord, I'm using that natural 9 and the natural 13, because that clearly points me to the Lydian Dominant scale, as opposed to other scales that include the sharp 11. Like you could have a diminished scale or an altered scale that also include a sharp 11 in there. But by having the natural 9, having the natural 13, it gives us that Lydian Dominant sound. Anyways, this is such a great sounding chord to add to your arsenal. If you weren't already using it, I hope you start using it now. When you see those 7 sharp 11 chord symbols, you know what to do. But also keep an eye out for those tritone subs and backdoor dominant chords that aren't listed with this sharp 11, because you know that you can add those sharp 11, those voicings in there, and it's going to sound great. If you don't think this is the most jazz sounding chord, tell me what you think it is. If you're getting some value from what I'm putting out here on YouTube, then please consider going over and supporting me on Patreon too. I hope you got some value from the video, maybe found some takeaways to add to your playing. Thanks for being here.